Hello, everybody. We are, if I'm counting correctly, at episode 34 of Scale Up Podcast. This is Dan Eisenberg, your Scale Up Podcast host. As you all know, this is a serious hobby for me. I think that it is unique, certainly unusual, if not unique, in that we're exploring all different kinds of scale up all around the world, all kinds of different segments. Today's episode is no exception. All kinds of different segments. We're going beyond the stereotypes of what entrepreneurship is or what it should be. And again, we're focusing solely on the question of how do you actually grow a company? Not how do you start it? How do you grow it? Whether it's old, young, manufacturing, services, American, Chinese, or what have you. And I'm very excited to have with me here today Jay Rogers, officially John Rogers, but we call him Jay. And I just say hi, Jay.
Hey, Dan, it's great to be here.
So I don't know if I can say this, but we've known each other now almost 20 years because
That's right.
When you were at Harvard Business School after quite a few years as a Marine, and we'll of course touch on that a little bit probably during our conversation today. And then I was an investor in an earlier venture of Jay's called Local Motors, which is, what's the right word? Genetically related to the current venture of Haddy.
That's a great way to put it. Yes.
And so we're going to explore all different kinds of things. And I'll make a disclosure that I was an investor in Local Motors and I am an investor in Haddy. I don't think that's going to change anything about what I ask or say today, but I just want you to know that. So here we are, and we're going to spend 35 minutes just chatting back and forth about everything to do with growing companies. So with that, Jay, I'm going to ask you, this is a little bit of a curveball. I'm going to ask you just to start off by telling us something that we can't see, that has nothing to do with Haddy or nothing to do with Local Motors, and that we can't find out from your LinkedIn profile about who Jay Rogers is.
Oh, that's a great question. I'm a dad, and I have four marvelous, very, very different boys. I have one
boys?
All boys. One who's a bird watcher, and so he works on training the AI app called Merlin at Cornell University, and that's just and one who is a classicist and an organ player, loves Bach. And then I have another one who's a wrestler and has just passed his first quals to be an EKG technician and dreams of being a surgeon. And I have another one who is ready to be a pilot in the Air Force. So that's something about me that you wouldn't be able to find out on LinkedIn.
I can absolutely not. And I can only imagine that there were some very interesting evenings at your house. I can only imagine. Anyway, so now
true.
tell us.
So true.
Now tell us, without saying anything about the numbers, what is Haddy?
Haddy is a 3D printing world builder. That's what we like to say. And what that means is that our technology stems from 3D printing, and we're out there to print the world.
Okay, bring that down to reality. What are you making?
It's funny when we say that. It's like people talking, our North Star is Amazon in 1994, where they said, we're going to sell everything. And people said, you're not even going to sell books. And so we started as a furniture maker. And for 2.5 years, all we printed was what we would call case goods, furniture that's not upholstered. And we were gearing up to do a lot of other things, but it took us some time. And so what it means now today is that we print in the entertainment division, we print boats, we print molds and forms for the marine and concrete and aerospace industry. We print lighting, we print furniture, fixtures, architectural elements, and we do a lot of work for the U.S. Department of War. So we print a lot of things.
So tell us a little bit just about the pain points that you address without going into the gory details, but you're addressing some very acute, deep pains, right?
The truth is that making things is hard. And we have been through many evolutions in my lifetime, which I think is the relevant time period for this challenge. And that is that we've lost a lot of industrial capacity in the United States. We remember things like Rosie the Riveter. We remember, that was outside of my lifetime, but we remember things like surging in order to be able to meet various challenges, big challenges. Like we tell stories of the race to the moon and John F. Kennedy saying, we don't do things because they are easy. We do things because they are hard. And America, I think, has somewhat of a generational complex of like, we can do it if we put our mind to it. But the world is different right now, and we have orphaned and we have vacated an enormous amount of tribal knowledge associated with many ways of making things. How to mine an internal permanent magnet motors contents, neodymium, dysprosium, how to do tool and die, how to forge at the level that we used to do in places like Bethlehem Steel. It's just not existent and hasn't been for 20 years. So you and I have known each other for what to me feels like a short period of time, Dan. But during that short period of time, America has lost a lot of making capability. And that's what Haddy is here to address, how to bring some of that making capability back to our shores.
Well, your customers aren't buying from you because they want to make America make again. They're buying because they have some need, right?
Yeah, they have a need. I think that, gone is the day also that Sam Walton, stood up and said, buy American just because it had red, white, and blue wrapped around it. I think what people have realized in post-COVID land and in an age of terrorism and all of the other things that deglobalize our world, tariffs, that it's hard to get things when they're 17,000 miles away and different languages and other things like that. So the need is, I can't get it. I can't get it fast enough, whatever it is. And that is a need, a fundamental need that we're solving.
Give us an example of one or two of your customers, including the ones that you've just signed recently, if you can.
Well, that's the amazing thing is, and I mean, I've been through companies before myself and advised companies where you dream of having a lot of customers. We have a lot of customers. And so it's a luxury to pick from those customers. I'll give you an example of one of our latest customers. This is what you would call a neo prime or a new prime in the Defense Department. And their business is to make boats autonomous. And I choose my words carefully because they don't make boats. They make autonomy systems for boats. If you read their website, they would say that they make autonomous boats. And so what they can't rely on anymore is an aluminum boat building market or industry in the United States or a glass fiber boat building market or industry in the United States because there's no labor to weld, to TIG weld. There's no labor to do layup. So when they want to make autonomous boats for these large and well-storied military contracts, there's nobody to make the boats. So we're solving that problem for them.
Okay. A non-defense customer.
And then a non-defense customer. Let's take a customer like, and I'm, again, luxury of choosing. We're going to talk about a bunch, Dan. So I'm going to choose one like Acuity Corporation. Acuity is a wonderful North American lighting provider of both functional and decorative light. They make gorgeous light. And that's something where that's not just the filament. As we all know, it's sort of like nobody likes, unless you're in some Bauhaus location, to just hang a bulb. It's what do you put around it?
Right.
A sconce, a lantern, other things like that. And so they typically bought that from China, and they have for the last 2 decades. And so in order to be able to make North American lighting fast and turn at the speed of Instagram, where people can show a new image just by speaking into a large language model, they need to be able to produce faster than a 52-week turn. And so for them, it's a totally non-defense application for functional and decorative lighting. And that's one of our most exciting customers right now.
So Jay, you have a factory right in downtown St. Petersburg, right? What's special? I've heard it's quite an experience. What's special about it?
Well, I've had the luxury of going to see, I grew up learning about the River Rouge plant in Detroit from Ford and the 6 million square feet under roof for Hyundai's motor plants where they have dormitories and other things like that. And we have a unique thing called a micro factory, and it's not quixotic. It's there. It's a micro factory for a reason. So it's in downtown St. Petersburg, Florida, which is in sort of like the bedroom community or the heart of the living room of the Tampa Bay area. And what it is it is about getting close to the 23 million people in Florida in about a 5-hour drive in all directions. So we're in the heartbeat of Florida, and we want to make it easy. Today's, let's call them zillennials. They have a real work ethic, but they also have a real desire to have a great lifestyle. And so we need roboticists and designers and and awesome logisticians and people that are thinking about chemistry, and they're just not going to go live in a place where they can't have a great lifestyle. So we've married the ability to be able to hire them and the ability to be able to be close to our population center by having these microfactories nestled into a city. And
So this is one. So this is your plan. This will be just one of many, many micro factories with real capacity, flexibility,
correct,
and all the other wonderful
and
attributes of manufacturing that you bring.
what they don't have, I mean, our microfactories are run by robots, and so what they don't have is they don't have a lot of labor. So we're not there looking for low cost labor, and that is a problem if you're going to go to a place like St. Pete, because your cost of labor is going to be higher than you would find in Shenzhen or in Vietnam.
Got it. So before we go on to talk a little bit, go back in history, tell us what you can, the story, a very short story, the short story of Haddy, just by the numbers. Just use numbers to tell us who or what Haddy is.
Yeah, we'll keep it tight by the numbers. We did a half year of work in 2023 when we got started, and we did $240,000 of business. In 2024, we doubled it. We did about $515,000 of business. In 2025, we doubled it again, and we did $1.1 million of business. So it was like a double, double, double. And I love the quote, because I'm about to tell you what happened next, where Bill Gates said, founders often, when they have a good idea, it's a Dan Eisenbergism, but it could be a bad idea, but if it's a good idea, they often underestimate in the long term what they're capable of doing, and they overestimate in the short term. Those first 3 years of operations were sluggish in my mind. Double, double, double to me is sluggish. But then December happened in 2025. We're firmly into tariff world. We're firmly into deglobalization in the Trump administration. And we did more revenue in December of 2025 than we did all the year before in 2024. And so, and then again, this first quarter of the year, we're on pace to do over $2 million in revenue. And so what that means is we will double the year 2025 in one quarter in 2026, the first quarter of 2026. We had our first break-even month in December of 2025 also. And so when I look at this game of business, and I think, Dan, you and I have known each other long enough to know that I have matured and grown up as a business person, as an investor, as a human, as a dad. And we are here to do good by our fellow humans. And as a businessman, I'm here to do good by our stakeholders. And we really are powerfully interested in what it takes to scale a business like this. So this is that moment.
So what you mentioned about the long history and so on, it's a good segue to talk about the past. And Local Motors didn't have such a good outcome. Tell us about what happened there. And then I want to ask you to reflect on exactly what lessons you learned that you have applied in getting Haddy to where it is today.
Okay. I am a very faithful person, and I believe in my soul that everything happens for a reason that's God-given. And so the Local Motors as a discrete investment outcome was not successful. The genetics of what Local Motors brought to what Haddy is today was very successful. And that is the discontinuity of the way in which we have structures in the venture world. And so what does that mean? What it means is we focused on an industry at Local Motors, which was the autonomous electric vehicle industry. And we focused on taking the tooling cost out by 3D printing vehicles. And we did it. We deployed 150 vehicles in 29 cities and 3 continents. And that was the tail of our sales. The challenge for us is that product needed to scale 10 times faster in order to be able to keep the investment afloat. I mean, I couldn't put it any simpler way, is that when we sold 1, we needed to sell 10. And when we sold 10, we needed to sell 100. And when we sold 100, we needed to sell 1,000 vehicles or more. And
so was it, just a question of sales?
It's a question of sales. The tech was there, and really the pricing was even there. The problem was regulation. And so we made a beautiful product. But as you can see, when you look at a company, a self-driving technology company like Waymo that doesn't make cars, but they install their system on commonly available cars like Jaguars and other things like that, they still struggle city by city to get regulators to allow them to put autonomous vehicles on the road. And that is now almost 25 years into the offing since we saw the first DARPA Grand Challenge for autonomy. It's just an incredibly stultifyingly slow amount of time to get a
So
product
there,
launched.
so you're talking about two separate products. I just want to tell the listeners that the first product was not an autonomous vehicle. It was a rally car for sports enthusiasts or car enthusiasts, 3D printed, etc. Very beautiful car, worked very well. And the second was an autonomous vehicle that was focused on campus, like a small bus, right, Jay? That was electronic and autonomous or semi-autonomous.
And for those people that want to look back in the Wayback Machine, the way we started Local Motors was we needed to get into the believability that we could make a car. And the 3D printing technology at the time wasn't big enough to be able to print the whole car. So we started with a vehicle called the Rally Fighter, and we built about 100 of them. It got us on the map. We 3D printed portions of it, and it was the start. It wasn't until halfway through the journey that the printing technology in polymer composites got to a stage where you could print a whole vehicle. So you were right. We started with a vehicle that was about, let's get in there when the technology was nascent. And I think that, you asked me for some of the key learnings. So like jumping to that today, Haddy is what we discussed. It's a 3D printed world builder, meaning we're not a car builder. We're somebody that can do lighting and molds and boats and forms and furniture and lots of different things. And we also could, of course, print cars. And we don't choose to because we want to stay out of that regulated business. And so what did I learn? I sat down in the interim time, in the interregnum between Local Motors and Haddy, and I wrote down some critical lessons. One of them was that we were going to stay out of highly regulated business. And I mean intensely regulated businesses. So like aerospace. We were going to stay out of carrying passengers in the air. We were going to stay out of things like building cars. We were going to stay out of the housing business. We didn't want to make homes because these things have great trade impingements like plumbers and electricians and like some of the core of jobs around the world. And they have lots of protections. Big learning. The other things is we wanted to be in products that had relatively few components that we were capable of making under roof, meaning that like we could, said differently, we could make the whole thing under one roof. And so that was a big thing. And then we also wanted to change some of the technology to make it financeable. And that wasn't obvious to people. That was not obvious. We wanted to get a robot that we could pay for with a loan from the SBA. And we've done all of those things. There were other learnings, but those are some of the big factors of what we did. We bought a system that was financeable.
I remember one thing that you told me, or at least I seem to remember that you told me about Haddy, that your approach to raising money was very different, and that this sequence of getting a customer versus raising money was different.
So like, I mean, what a wonder. Only someone like you, Dan, could ask that question so well and and also understand, I think, the answer. And hopefully your listeners will appreciate what I say. So I'm a big fan, Dan, of entrepreneurs, the likes of which I would say, let's call out Elon Musk, founder of Tesla and SpaceX, or co-founder, and Palmer Luckey, founder of Anduril. These are not people that waited for a customer in order to be able to build a business. I love the lessons of find a customer first and go build a business. Those are tried and true lessons, but there are other entrepreneurs like those two who have done very well not doing that. And in Local Motors, I chose their path. I went out, we had a technology, and we were not selling into a well-known market. There were not autonomous electric vehicles that were called for or needed. And so we built ahead of the market and we were early. With Haddy, I decided to do it differently. And I could have tried to swing the bat the same way, but I felt like it was too risky. So I went out and I found a furniture company that needed furniture that couldn't buy what they wanted, couldn't find the sustainability that we bring. It's another thing for us to talk about. And I got an order from them before I raised $1 for the business.
So it's capital intensive. It's a capital intensive business. You have real heavy equipment. You have robots and, everything that goes around them. So you had to then, with that order, go out and build your initial capacity. Is that right?
That's correct. And it's a capital intensive business, but don't hear that it's an equity intensive business. And I think that those things are often confused. And in today's venture world, a lot of people say, well, I raise venture debt. Well, there's a big difference between raising 21% venture debt and having a debt finance business that's viable outside of your equity. So it is a capital intensive business, but I have been told by our investors, in fact, as recently as this week, like, look how efficient your capital usage has been in order to generate the amount of revenue that you've done. So I would say we're a capital efficient, capital intensive business that's not equity capital intensive.
In other words, you're leveraging. Basically, you have
And
a lot of leverage.
we're leveraging and we're deliberately choosing assets that we can leverage. And that is a deliberate choice. You don't do it after the fact. You got to choose ahead of time.
Now, you're also touching on some buttons or checking some boxes that are pretty high priority socially, very visible these days: local manufacturing, American products, etc. How important is that in terms of your ability to get resources, whether it's money, people, land, equipment, etc.?
We want to talk about motherhood and apple pie and entrepreneurship. Like, one of them is get a customer before you go and raise money. So we've chatted about that. But another one is get behind the what countries and cities and people want, which is they want growth of their GDP. They want growth of their economy. And so if you bring a business that has what I call the high indirect job quotient, it's not just who you employ under your roof. You're the darling of a mayor and a darling of an economic development commission. And then, and for federal governments, when you reshore jobs, especially things like robotics jobs, it's a big deal. So yes, we bring a lot of those things, and therefore there are a lot of grants and subsidies and dispensations and other things like that just help. They don't make the business work, but they just help.
And you're in the very middle of St. Petersburg, right? Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, like, for people who don't know Florida, they often look at Florida and they're like, well, it's the home of Donald Trump and it's the home of, a big Republican administration. Florida's a super purple state. And from a politics perspective, it's also a state that really cares about the environment. It is one that sits in the middle of Hurricane Alley, and in increasingly warmer global temperatures, the virulent storms that roll across Florida are a major thing to contend with. It is a place that's full of grandparents. St. Petersburg used to be known by David Letterman as God's waiting room, and yet it's got all their grandchildren that have moved to town to sort of help take care of their grandparents, and then decide to set up shop and live there. It's a wonderfully diverse and interesting place in the middle of Florida, and in this great Tampa Bay region, which is a beautiful ecological ecosystem on the Gulf Coast, and that's where we are.
And hand on your heart, when you wanted to build Haddy, you looked around the country and said, "This is where I want to be," or you found yourself in St. Petersburg, say, "I'm founding Haddy, and let me make up a rationale for why I'm in St. Petersburg."
Hand on my heart, absolutely not. Like, I was hell bent on moving to St. Petersburg and that's where I was going to start a business. No. Hand on my heart, I mean, the strategy of this business was mid-sized cities that are close to population dense areas with good ports were what we were looking for. And there are lots of those. We like Hampton Roads, Virginia. We like Seattle. We like San Francisco. We like Boston. We like Maryland. We like all of them. And so, but one of the good ones in Florida is Tampa Bay. So that's why we went. It was one example. We couldn't be in 20 places. We had to be in one. So we chose that.
Let's talk about people. You were a Marine commander before you came to Harvard Business School, if I remember correctly. I think were you at Princeton before that as an undergraduate?
I was, but they were, as you may remember, not contiguous. I graduated Princeton and moved to China, and I lived there for 3 years in the manufacturing industry for medical products. Then I came back and I got my chartered financial analyst designation, and I lived in Dallas, but in a bank buying fund is where I worked. And then I started Stanford Business School, and I met a Marine. I dropped out of Stanford Business School and I joined the Marines. And I did that for almost 7 years. And in my last tour of duty, I decided that I was going to go build a 3D printed car company.
So let's talk about the Marines. And I know we all have our image of what that's like. And I've had some other Marines on this podcast, by the way. But I want to hear from you how that's impacted you as an entrepreneur and as a leader.
So the number of books there are about what it takes to be a Marine leader and what you learn from it are legion. And I think they all have awesome truths in them. But my journey and my feeling started with wanting to learn how to lead. I had never led before, and so I didn't know what it meant to apply closely held lessons of how to lead humans. And I was just so lucky to join the Marines, or to join the Marines even just at the time that I did. I was 27 years old, so I was a little older. I mean, there were Marines that I started with who were 18, and that's a big difference, those 9 years at that time. And so learning how to lead people, and then lead them when the stakes are high, because what we do is we serve at the pleasure of the U.S. Uh, Constitution, and we protect and defend that Constitution all over the world against enemies, foreign and domestic. And it is really the kind of thing where you get your opportunity to lead day in and day out, and I'm so grateful for it.
So, what were some of the lessons that have followed you into the private sector?
It might not surprise you that I've thought about that, and I get asked about it a lot. So I put some words to paper, and these are the things I have. I I call out 15 leadership traits and principles that I've learned in the Marines and in business afterwards, and put them together. And they are that.
Don't give us all 15. Give us a few.
Okay, I'll give you a few, but I think that they are. I was actually just going to kind of explain what they are. They're traits and principles, and you never have them all. And the interesting thing is, it's just how do you mix them up? And so, some examples that I think are interesting are judgment. It's the kind of thing you talk to your kids about. Do you have good judgment? Do you have good tact? Do you have constantly growing knowledge? Are you willing to read and learn and listen and those things? We talk about people that have like two ears and one mouth, those sorts of things. And so those are examples of these things. And one of them that I've added that I definitely did not learn in the Marine Corps, but I have learned in business, is vulnerability. I think that it's critically important as a leader to be vulnerable. And so out of these leadership traits and principles, I have built the values for Haddy that we espouse. There are only 6 of those. And they're a tighter list. They aren't a leadership list. They're a list of values that we have in running the company. And I believe in words a lot. And just like there's a strong difference between something like a mission and an intent, those words are not the same, and a vision, they're all different. Our leadership traits and principles versus our values are things that I have parsed, taken out of the Marine Corps, applied to business, and I think a lot about them as the soul of what we do.
Let's come back to vulnerability. How does that manifest itself on the shop floor, so to speak?
Yeah. Vulnerability is being willing to get curious. So it's really common when you have somebody that underperforms, and that can be a teammate. It also can be a customer. Customers underperform, and so when they're upset at you, and or you have a disagreement about something, are you willing to shut up and listen? And I think that that is a lot about what it means to be vulnerable. You might think you're right. You might be right, but are you willing to listen? And are you willing to get curious and saying, like, here, I can see that you're frustrated about something. Why, tell me more about that. And that works for every single engagement that I have. I have learned to listen a lot more, because I do believe in the basic human condition of people don't want to be mean. They don't, there are things that they feel misunderstood about. And if you can serve that and listen, and then say it back to them, which is an imago technique, but it's a good technique. It's just simply listening and then repeating back and saying, let me say it back and tell me whether I've heard what you said. They feel honored. And that vulnerability is worth its weight in gold. It stops you from doing things like writing people up on a performance improvement program before you know what they were really about. It stops you from firing a customer before you knew what they really wanted. Those are some of the things that vulnerability has brought.
You know, for me, one of the connotations of vulnerability is also that when I make a mistake, it's just normal. I admit it and learn from it. And I think that, in my experience anyway, it comes natural to me because I make a lot of mistakes. But I think it's showing that you're not perfect and that you don't expect other people to be perfect, but to learn. And by the way, that brings me back to something. One of our interactions. You may or may not remember this, but after I taught my class and the section that you were in, I convened a little lunch to get feedback from the students to tell me what I could do to improve the class. And I would choose the students who were vocal in class and not afraid to get to stake out their opinion. And you were one of them. And I remember very clearly you saying, Dan, and I forget the exact words, but I remember clearly you said, Dan, I assume that you convened us because you really wanted to hear what I have to say. And uh, it was not positive feedback, as I recall, which I respect. And by the way, it also gave me the opportunity. It was one of the many data points that gave me the opportunity to say, "There's a problem," and that was one of the turnarounds. That next semester, I became one of the best teachers at HBS because I failed that semester and learned from it.
Well, I mean, Dan, I quote you more often than most of the mentors that I've had in my life, and I think that your willingness to listen makes those lessons attach very well. And I just want to say about vulnerability, the Marines, just back to that subject for me, they have a form of vulnerability, which is if you don't know an answer, say, I don't know, and then follow it up very quickly with, and I will find out. And I think early on, I didn't see that as vulnerability. You see it as weakness. But I want to, like, for your listeners, think about a thought experiment. Like, put this in your space as you listen to this and think about the following. Somebody works for you, somebody works with you, and they got something wrong. They know it, you know it. Think about how wonderful it is if they're to approach you and say, the first thing through the door, hey, I really got that wrong, but I figured out what I did wrong, and here's what my plan is to try it next. Just think about how that makes you feel. You feel like you forget that they got it wrong. You actually see them in a stronger light. And I think that thought experiment to me has taught me, like, if I like that about people that I work with, that's the kind of person that I should be. Like, hey, I got that wrong, but I figured out, like, what I think happened, and here's my plan to do it next. It just makes everybody feel better.
I wish that a lot of leaders would listen to those last few sentences, to be quite honest. I think it's missing. Uh, well, Jay, I promise my listeners to keep this relatively short, about 35 minutes. And so we're going to wrap up. But I want to wrap up by giving you a little bit of a thought experiment. And it may be one that you've actually engaged in. And that is, you're talking to your kids or you're talking to your former self with all the things that you've learned. Let's say your former self, but a 25-year-old or 20-year-old who wants to start a business or build a business. What are the 2 or 3 really critical lessons or thoughts that you would give them?
Well, the first one is put one foot in front of the other and do not look at social media or other things and look for the quick hit. Sometimes things will happen quickly, and guaranteed in your life, you will have a lot of failures. And so, like, you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and everything happens for a reason. So when a door closes, another one opens. And also when one opens, another one closes. And I think that, like, those things, I think are just axiomatic. There is no such thing as somebody that just wakes up and has success for their whole life. People may say they do, but you never know inside all of the things that they suffer from. And so I think that's point number one. And then point number two, these, by the way, are very well-known things, but they are ones that mean the most to me. So point number two would be love what you do. And if you stop loving it, you really should not be into doing it. And you don't have to love everything. There are going to be people who build great businesses that do things that utterly bore you. Don't do those things. And when you're passionate about something, find a way to make it work for your avocation. And I think that to me, as a point number two, keeps you going. It allows point number one to happen, to put one foot in front of the other. And then point number three, which I've learned, those other two I think I had as I started, but point number three is be willing to let your team do the work. And that is critical. At some point as an entrepreneur, you're usually alone when you start. And so, like, you don't have a team. But then hire people as advisors. That was a big lesson. One of the many things that I learned is I didn't want to do it alone. I did Local Motors alone when I started, and I didn't want to do that with Haddy. And so find group of people that you can rely on, and then ask them to do things and have them deliver, because they want to help and they feel more valued when they do. And so I think that as entrepreneurs grow up and scale, which is really what we're talking about, there is this cult of the rugged individual entrepreneur that does everything. And don't get me wrong, you better be ready to work your ass off. Like, that's critically important, but ask everybody else to do it also. And then everybody levels up. 3 lessons.
Well, I can tell you that as an investor, and I just signed my 112th direct investment this morning.
Amazing.
I don't feel like it's amazing only because I've stuck with it to the point where now I'm actually doing okay. It's easy to bail out early on and lose all your money, but if you're lucky, mostly lucky and persistent, and you have good people around you and have opportunities and recognize them, then eventually you can actually make some money. Yes, that's true. But one of the things I have learned, although it's not a hard and fast rule, but the founding team, the 2 or 3 co-founders, is stronger than the one founder. All else being equal, which it almost never is, obviously. There are single founders who are amazing, and there are teams that fall apart. But all else being equal, that duo or trio, and having those people that really are in there with you is really makes a difference.
It does. They don't always show up on day one, too. Sometimes they show up
That's
a
true.
couple years into the journey, and
That's true.
sometimes, they never show up. And so, but yeah, it does. It helps to rely on people. Ownership. We talk about ownership. There's psychological ownership. There's financial ownership. They don't always align. And so, yes, it makes a
So
difference.
thank you very, very much, Jay Rogers, founder, I should say, co-founder of Haddy. That's going to be the not just furniture company, it's the maker company to watch and to buy from. This is Dan Eisenberg signing off from Scale App Podcast. Remember, this is a serious hobby. I'm not asking for money. I'm doing this because it's something that I find just really exciting. It gives me a chance to ask lots and lots of people, lots and lots of questions, and learn from them. So stay with us. This is a journey that's going to continue, and I'm sure it's going to change over time. So adios to everybody, and thank you again, Jay Rogers of Haddy.
Thanks, Dan.